Chapter 16. The Professor and the Map. 2 days passed before Chris received a reply from the Professor. Dr. Valentine had managed to partially decrypt it. She went on to say that it was Sumerian in origin, however there were pieces missing to fully understand what it meant. She asked whether she could examine the rest of the document. "Well, gentlemen, it seems we have a decision to make. Shall we allow the good Professor to examine the full document? You realise once she has seen it, there will be a lot more questions," Chris said as he finished reading her reply. "I think you're going to have to, if you want to know what the rest of it says. I don't really see any other option," James replied. "But maybe suggest that she comes here to see it, rather than sending another image. That way at least we can see how trustworthy she is." "Seems like a reasonable suggestion," Chris agreed. He emailed her back to say that he would be delighted for her to see it, adding that because parts of the document were rather aged, it was difficult to photograph, and asked whether it would be possible for her to come to Martinstow to view the rest of the document. Half an hour later she replied, saying that she would be delighted to, and would try to clear her schedule for the rest of the week. She would ring later to confirm what day she would be able to arrive. An hour later she rang to say that she'd managed to create some space and would be driving down the very next day, adding that she planned on staying for as long as was necessary to complete the translation. Potentially that could take some time, as Sumerian was not a literal language, and phrases often had more than one meaning, depending on the context. Dr. Devon Valentine sat in her compact study, going over the image that Captain Flack had sent to her. She found it very curious. She had never seen such a well-preserved piece of Sumerian text before, or, for that matter, one that was quite so detailed. She wondered how he had come to acquire such a document, how genuine it was, and if it was genuine, how she'd not heard of its discovery. There certainly hadn't been any major finds for at least 2 years, and the most recent one before that she'd been a part of. Archaeological teams had made great progress in understanding the culture. This new text might help her to publish a new thesis she'd been working on, one in which she speculated that they had been great travellers and had had knowledge of the Americas well before Christopher Columbus discovered them in 1592. It was a claim that many of her colleagues had told her was preposterous, and that she would be committing professional suicide. She would be risking widespread ridicule throughout the archaeological community if she published. So far she had resisted the urge to publish, mainly because she knew she lacked the evidence to support it. Nevertheless, she was convinced that she was right, and was determined to publish at some point. Either way, she was intrigued by the symbols she had seen, symbols that talked about a vast store of knowledge, but the text was incomplete to work out any more. She had decided well before the invitation to view it in person. She really needed to see it in the flesh, so to speak, and had cleared her schedule before Captain Flack had made the invitation. She had deliberately told Captain Flack that she needed to clear her schedule first, so that she didn't seem overly keen to view the parchment. The journey down to Martinstow for Dr. Valentine had been pleasant enough, not that she really noticed the rich autumn colours of the English countryside, as her mind had been firmly fixed on the text. She was buzzing with excitement, eager to see the full text and what it all meant. Would she finally be able to publish her groundbreaking thesis, turning the archaeological world on its head? Only time would tell. Turning into the driveway, she took in the splendour of the great house, immediately falling in love with the warmth of the pink Italian architecture that was nestled into the backdrop of green coniferous forests. Chris greeted her as she stepped out of her car. "Good afternoon, Dr. Valentine. I hope you found us okay. I'm Chris Flack," he said with a warm, welcoming smile. "Yes, it was very easy to find, thank you. You have a beautiful home," she replied in the sweet, dulcet tones of her voice. "I wish I could claim to own it, but unfortunately not. It's on loan for a while, but I agree, it is a very captivating setting. Can I take your bags for you?" Chris asked, being ever the gracious host. "Thank you, that's most kind," she replied as she handed him her suitcase. "If you'd like to follow me, I'll show you around. We thought you'd enjoy one of the bedrooms on the south wing. It has some of the best views overlooking the river. I hope you'll find it comfortable enough." "Sounds perfect," she replied with a smile. He left her bag in the hall while he gave her a brief tour of the ground floor so that she could get her bearings before taking her upstairs to her room. He left her to unpack and arranged to meet her downstairs in the hall when she was ready. The room on the south wing was, as he had said, one of the best rooms in the house. It had cool yellow walls with white plaster cornicing and matching skirting boards. There was a large Chippendale dressing table with a beautifully crafted oval mirror along the right-hand side wall. Next to this stood a tall double-breasted chestnut wardrobe with intricately carved cast brass handles. The most impressive feature of the room was the huge, super king-size double bed up against the left-hand side. It looked so inviting with soft, plump feather pillows and a very plush duvet. Devon resisted the urge to fall backwards onto it, as appealing as the feeling of gradually sinking into the soft, thick mattress was. She was more eager to examine the ancient parchment. So unpacking her bag quickly and putting her clothes away in the wardrobe, rather less neatly than she would have normally done, she hurried back downstairs to join Chris in the hall. Chris had almost had to take a double take when he first laid eyes on Dr. Valentine. She had not been at all what he had expected a professor to look like. She was stunningly beautiful. Her elegant, curvaceous body with long, flowing brunette locks were captivating. She had the most mesmerizing green eyes set deeply into the sleek lines of her tanned face. They sparkled like rich emeralds. He could have lost himself in those eyes for eternity, if he had not quickly recovered before greeting her. Luckily for him, she had not noticed his initial reaction. She was just as beautiful now as she descended the stairs down to the hall. "May I take a look at the parchment? After all, that is why I'm here. I'm excited to get started," she said as she walked across the polished oak floor towards where he was waiting. "Certainly, but first I must ask that you promise not to divulge your findings to anybody. I realise that this is a rather bizarre request. It is a rather sensitive subject, and I would not like its existence to become common knowledge. I'm sorry that I can't be more forthcoming as to exactly why at this time. Nevertheless, these are the terms under which you may view it." She looked at him closely, examining his facial expressions, trying to work him out, but he gave no clue away as to why he would make such a request. It was certainly a strange request, although she had expected some such thing. Private collectors tended to be rather protective about their acquisitions. She knew that the only way to see the parchment was to agree and hopefully renegotiate later. "I understand, and will agree," she replied after a momentary pause in which she tried to think of a better solution. Unable to think of one, the only option open to her was to make the agreement. He took her from the hall through the winding corridors of the house to the library. The parchment lay unrolled on a reading desk. Dr. Valentine took out a pair of thin, dark-rimmed spectacles from her handbag. the kind that are popular with secretaries, and began to inspect the document. After a few minutes she looked up. "It is certainly Sumerian in origin. I can see why you said it was better to view the actual document. It's far more detailed than I had imagined it would be. I had not realised that it would form part of a map, or rather part of one. Regrettably it appears there is a piece missing, torn off by the looks of it. It will take quite some time to translate it all. There are some symbols I have not come across before. Most curious. I don't think I've ever seen anything like it." "You're not one of those treasure hunters, are you?" she asked, hoping to gain further insight. She wanted to know what she was getting herself into. "Ha! I doubt what I'm looking for would make me a particularly rich man. It is important for me that what is written here can be translated. I'm afraid I can't be clearer than that. I have a few things that I need to attend to, so I hope you won't mind if I leave you to your work. If there is anything that you should need, just ring the bell," he said, indicating the tasselled rope hanging in one corner of the room. "Thank you. I'm sure I'll find everything I need. I must just fetch a few books from my car before I begin," she replied. Her mind was full of questions, but she knew she would have to wait to find the answers. This parchment was extraordinary, almost perfectly preserved, and contained far more information than she could have ever imagined. It was strange. The continents pictured were not the ones she had expected to find on a Sumerian map. Rather than being parts of Mesopotamia, she was almost certain they were the Americas. Was it a fake? Just some kind of elaborate practical joke played by some of her colleagues at the museum? The clues would be found in the symbols themselves. It would take a long time to decipher all of it, so she decided she had best get started. Dr. Valentine returned from her car laden with a pile of books, some of which were teetering precariously, threatening to tumble to the ground at any moment. Luckily, she somehow managed to get all of the books, in a slightly less graceful manner than she would have wished, into the library and deposit them onto a desk before they fell everywhere. Setting herself up on 2 reading desks, she started to work through the text, picking out a number of symbols she already recognised as a starting point. The further she got, the more complex and weirder the translation became. The problem she faced was that many of the symbols had more than one meaning, and so until she put a string of them together, the overall meaning would not reveal itself. Chris popped his head in from time to time during the course of the afternoon to see how much progress she was making. He found the symbols fascinating and could have spent hours asking her about how the Sumerian language was developed, but he refrained, not wanting to take up too much of her time. At about 10 o'clock, after rubbing her eyes for the umpteenth time, she decided to call it a day. The meaning of the part she'd been working on was taking her round in circles. She hoped that a fresh pair of eyes in the morning would help. She passed Chris in the hall. "How's it going?" he asked. "Have you had much luck?" "No, I'm going to head outside for a bit. I feel like staring at a wall for a bit before I end it. I'm in a good mood, but I'm about ready to shoot somebody. This thing keeps taking me round in circles. Just as I think I've cracked it, the meaning changes." She sighed. She was tired and feeling a bit overwhelmed. "That bad, huh? Well, as long as you don't shoot me, I'm sure you'll prevail in the end. It's obviously the first day, and it took longer than that to build Rome, or so they say. Mysteries are never quite as easy to solve as one would like them to be. I guess that's why we call them mysteries," he replied, hoping that a bit of humour might cheer her up. "I suppose you're right, and I wouldn't dream of shooting you." She laughed. and left to get some air, feeling slightly better already. James, Michael and Rachel had been out for the day. They had not yet met the Professor. Returning to Martinstow at about 10:30, they headed into the smoking room to relax. Chris and Dr. Valentine were already there, enjoying a bottle of red wine. Chris introduced them, and they spent a few hours chatting about the parchment and her background. Glancing at her watch, Devon was amazed to discover it was almost 1 o'clock in the morning. She excused herself and headed off to bed. It had been a long day. She was exhausted and wanted to get an early start. The others bid her good night. They stayed up for a while longer, discussing their first impressions of their new guest. She's quite sultry, isn't she? Especially when she's wearing those black-rimmed glasses. Crushing already? There's a surprise, James said with a knowing look at Chris. Well, I wouldn't say no. I notice she's got a cheeky tattoo of the Egyptian all-seeing eye on her lower back. And pray tell me how you came to notice that? Her blouse was riding up as she bent down to pick up some books as I walked into the library earlier this afternoon. Always did have a thing for girls with tattoos. Can be very sexy in the right place. She's certainly energetic. Maybe it's that exotic blood. I'm pretty sure she said that part of her family originated from Egypt, which would also explain her choice of tattoo. Hey, cuz, I expected better than that from you. How about less of the savage on heat and more of the gent that I used to know? Honestly, sometimes I really wish we weren't related. Sorry, what I meant to say was that I think she's cute and really intelligent, which I think is really attractive and that she intrigues me. Just so used to putting things in terms that those lot can understand, he replied, slightly sheepishly after being semi-berated. I'll be happy as long as she finishes that translation. Anyway, I don't know about the rest of you, but I'm heading off to bed. I think there is going to be quite a lot to do in the morning. Devon was awoken early the next morning by a stream of sunlight flowing through a slit between the curtains. She was tired and yet was buzzing with enthusiasm to get back to the parchment in the library. Her dreams had been filled with the implications of its discovery. She dressed and headed downstairs. She grabbed a mug of coffee from the kitchen on the way to the library. Finally, after an hour or so of going over what she'd been working on the previous day, she clapped her hands together with joy. The first few lines finally made sense. The double meaning had parted to reveal the truth. A sacred journey across the great sea. Originally, she had thought that it had been describing a method of worship, a religious path to the god of the sea, Namu. She now understood it was actually an actual journey rather than a metaphorical one, a great journey undertaken across a vast stretch of water. She was pleased by her efforts. However, she was left with more questions than answers. Why was it undertaken? Where was the destination? Who travelled? At least the puzzle was beginning to unravel. Morning all, Chris announced as he entered the kitchen to find James, Michael and Rachel sitting around the kitchen table. Where's the good professor? Busy in the library. She was up well before any of us, James replied. She is dedicated, I'll give her that. I think I'll pop in and see how she's getting on. Is that toast going spare? Chris asked, as his eyes hit upon a plate lying on the table with a few leftover slices. Someone's in a good mood this morning. Crack on, Mon. We've all finished, Michael answered in his familiar Salopian patter. Sweet, I'll see you guys later, Chris replied, as he snatched up the bits of toast and headed off in the direction of the library. "I wonder why he's in such a good mood this morning," James said. "I would have thought it was obvious. He has a thing for the Professor," Rachel said. "Honestly, as soon as there's a pretty face around, you lot prance around like a bunch of peacocks." "I see. Not jealous, are we?" James attempted at a flirtatious question, was met with little amusement from Rachel. "Probably not. He's my cousin, after all." "That wasn't exactly what I meant," he trailed off as he realised he was about to dig himself into a hole. "Morning, Professor," James said as he entered the library. "How's it going this morning?" "Very well. I think I've finally started to piece parts of it together. And please, call me Devon," she said, beaming at him as she looked up from behind a pile of books. She was happy to be able to share her success with somebody. "I can take you through it if you like." "I'd be most interested." "This first line here talks about a great expedition undertaken across a great expanse of water to a far-off land. The expedition met with another great civilization. They were transporting something of great importance. I haven't quite managed to work out exactly what it was yet. The text is rather vague on precisely what it was or why they transported it. It was certainly something that the Sumerians placed a tremendous amount of significance on. Hopefully in time this will become a lot clearer," she said, smiling, happy that she had finally had some good news for him. "Sounds like you made some good progress. I'll leave you to it unless there's anything else I can get you. Let me know if anything else pops up." "Thanks. I think I have everything I need for the moment." "Well, I'll see you a bit later," Chris said as he left. Chris found James indulging in a cigarette in the smoking room. "Ah, there you are. The Professor's been filling me in on her progress." "I bet she has," James said with such a tiny hint of sarcasm that James almost didn't pick up on it. "What was that?" "Oh, nothing. What has she found?" "I'll tell you later. But first I think you and I should catch up with Ollie and Gaz. We haven't really spoken to them for a while, and it should be interesting to find out what Norwood has been up to." "That's probably a good idea. You know what those two are like. If they're left alone unsupervised for too long," James replied, thinking about the revenge he was going to exact on that man for the death of Jack.